What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the next episode of Arena Goat Talk. I'm your host, DJ Burt. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, and follow. On this next episode, I have one of my former coaches and a coach that I look up to, former Coach of the Year. I think he won it twice, Mr. Coach Ron James. How you doing today, sir?
Man, I'm great, EJ. It's good to see you.
I appreciate you taking your time to come on and sharing your story and giving the advice that that's out there that you like to share. You forgot more football than I can know, so I'm all ears to learn from you.
Well, EJ, you know what they say, it's more reps. That's all it is as you get older as a coach, and I've got a lot of reps under my belt.
So, but I appreciate it. So, but yeah, we'll start out just kind of, introducing yourself. Let's talk about where you're from and then how you got into Arena, how you got into coaching.
Well, it's a long story, but I think a pretty fascinating one. I was coaching college football for 14 years before I got into Arena football. And like what I did was I'm from Albany, New York. So, Ron James, and I grew up in the Albany, New York area. And when the Firebirds first started, it was 1990. I was coaching at a place called St. Lawrence University in upstate New York, Division III school, where I was the defensive coordinator. And in those days, the AFL only played the shortened season. There were 8 games, and they played all during the summer. So I was on a 9-month contract. It seemed like a good deal. And I went home, and I met a guy named Rick Buffington, who was the first head coach of the Firebirds. And we hit it off. And I said, is there any chance I can come on and coach with you guys? This looks like a really fun game. And then I did that for 2 years. And then when the AFL got their schedule lengthened, it ate into my contract as a college coach. So I stayed at the college, went on and coached at a couple other colleges, and then got back into the Arena Football League after I coached at West Point in the late 90s. And so I got to see it in the beginning. I got to see it in its growing years. And I got to see it, unfortunately, at the end as well. But the AFL was a huge part of my career, 12 years as a head coach in the league and 15 years overall. So really enjoyable experience for me.
Definitely, yeah. It's good, keeping up with your journey through the years and seeing the successes and everything. So when you first got introduced to the game, right, what was kind of like your thought process? What did you think about it?
It looked a little like quirky, kind of strange, because all you know is the outdoor game, right? 11-man football and traditional ways of playing. And I was kind of like, well, this looks really strange. But it kind of was like, at the time, I was working a lot of basketball camps. And I went to Siena College. It's a huge basketball school, Division I program. And so I would work basketball camps. I got to know a lot of hoop coaches. And through knowing a lot of these big-time basketball coaches, I said, you know what? It's kind of a hybrid. You've got the possession-based thing, you've got the clock, you've got the management, the quick pace, all the things. I said, that could be appealing for me to get into something like that, knowing the kind of the way I think and the way I determine possessions and stuff like that, and then learning from some great coaches in the AFL that I never expected to cross paths with. And it just became a passion of mine. I just really took to the game and loved it. And coaching players like yourself, guys that have been around, guys that are either NFL or CFL players or looking to make another jump, kind of guys that were coachable but wanted to know that, I had something to offer. And those are the type of people I want to coach on a professional level.
Mm-hmm. All right. So was there any kind of special motivation for you through the years? Like, I got into coaching because of this, or was there any kind of special motivation for you?
Well, to me, coaching is teaching, right? So I predicate that on the fact that I think I'm a very good teacher. I've actually, ironically, taught in a high school for 4 years prior to this also. So I just really love that environment. I love teaching the game, and it's a different game. So you're going to have to learn it in a different way, and you're going to have players that are willing to be taught. And it's also, the thing that really lit my fire about Arena football was that the game was never out of reach. And you could manage the game in such a way that you could get it down to a possession or two. You could always be in the game. And if you were really good at it, as a team and knew your concepts and your personnel, you were able to sneak out a couple wins because the rules were different and the timing was different.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So if you were to describe your coaching style, How would you describe that?
I would say very hands-on. You've seen it in action years ago, but usually I'm in every drill. I mean, I'm very emotional and animated during practices. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I give the players everything I've got and a little bit more every time that we touch the field, because I think that's what it takes. And for me, it's about the energy. It's about the camaraderie, and it's about the chemistry you form within your team. And so that's, once the locker room gets in your blood, he just never leaves you. And you know that. That's what makes it great.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So when you, I guess early in your AFL career, you kind of, it seemed like you're kind of trying to stay kind of regional to Utah. That, on the West Coast, I think you're in Vegas as well. Was that something that was strategic for you, or was it just like the best opportunities you went along with?
Well, it started out that way because I started out regionally after I coached at West Point. Then I got the job with the New Jersey Gladiators, and then that team wound up moving out to Las Vegas. So that's what moved me to the West Coast. And
Okay.
so being out west, it just became natural for me to be, with the Gladiators there, and then different stops and different places. And then we just decided to call Utah home base because I was with the Blaze for 5 years as an assistant under Danny White, which I learned a ton from Danny, and then as the head coach. And we just said, you know what, we need a home base for the kids. So we wanted to raise our kids in one house in one city. And so we've stayed here ever since.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Danny White. What was it like coaching with him?
Oh, it was great. I mean, Danny is the most giving person. There's no ego attached to him, despite where he's been and the things he's accomplished. He was a great teacher of the game. I learned a lot about offense from him. I learned much more about thinking about players instead of plays and the timing of plays from him. I thought he was a master at that. But it was also a great opportunity for me to learn something different, because I'd been with a bunch of different coaches. I mean, early in the Firebird days with Rick Buffington and with Mike Hohensee and Mike Daly and Steve Tunn when I was down in Houston, Frank Hagee out in Vegas. So I was able to learn a lot from a lot of good coaches. And then getting with Danny was like going to AFL 101. I mean, I'm back in school and learning more things.
Mm-hmm. So I got a chance to, of course, be under, you and Danny in Utah. And that was a nice atmosphere. You can kind of tell you guys you're building something special out there. And so I went out there, and like I said, started to grow on me when I was there. But of course, things happen when the league kind of went down or whatever, and that was a whole experience in itself. But kind of touch on that environment out in Utah, because not a lot of people knew about the overall environment, the community, how they embrace you guys and everything.
Well, it was a wonderful place to be. I mean, I still live here, and I grew up in New York. So to be out here on the West Coast and be in Salt Lake City, totally different environment. But I think it's a very homespun environment, and very much take care of your neighbor type of a place. And I think you feel that a lot of players stayed here because they felt the environment, the culture, the social contact was always great for them. And we had some terrific owners. I mean, the Ken Garff Group, John Garff and his family that owned the team when you were with us. And then after the league revitalized or changed the market here in Salt Lake City, then Kristen Murdoch and Logan Hunter became the owners of the franchise. And Kristen's still a great friend to this day. I still see her and go to Jazz games with her and stuff. So it's that type of atmosphere that you don't get in many places. You don't have that, that cultural, I won't say diversity, because there's kind of a lack of diversity in Salt Lake City. But what you happen to have is people that care about one another, and people will go the extra mile for you. And I found that from businesses to individuals to food trade to everything that we were doing was always like, how can we help you? And so that attitude was great for me, and it has been for my family as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely love that, and all the experiences out there. Even to where the Garfs had us go to a couple of their homes, vacation homes and stuff like that, and being in Florida, being from Ohio, it's a new experience being on the West Coast, and you never thought about Utah. That's why it was such a unique experience for me, because I've never thought I'd be there. and then you get a taste of Utah, and it's like it's not that bad out here, you know.
It's so culturally different, right? I mean, as a New Yorker, as a Catholic, then you're throwing into Salt Lake City, it's all LDS, and you're trying to find out what that's going to be like. But what I found is like people are people, right? But they loved the AFL. I mean, you know, you go to those Blaze games, they're packing the house. It's the number one story on the news, and the recruiting process is pretty simple because when you bring people into the city, you find out that they love it. So I really enjoyed it.
Definitely, it was a culture shock for me coming from Orlando, right?
Yeah.
So Orlando was the party atmosphere, right? And you got a taste of that when you were coaching out in Tampa. So that whole environment, I remember being War on I-4, and this is when I was like a rookie or something in the huddle, and it's loud and everything, and you get a glimpse of things that inflatables that are bouncing around in the crowd. You're like, is that what I think it is? And yep, that's exactly what it is. And there's like, you get used to that environment, and then fast forward, I'm in Utah. In timeouts, they're playing SpongeBob and stuff like that. It's just like, huh? It was a complete culture shock. So, but in the end, like I said, I like that environment. You know what I mean? It was just a pretty cool deal.
Oh yeah, and that, the War on I-4 was special for me as well, being the Tampa coach. But being out here, like you said, we used to call it the Mormon miracle. When people would show up late, is because they couldn't get their big families into the minivans in time to be on time for the game. But middle of the first quarter, you're like, oh my goodness, look at this crowd. The house would be packed. But yeah, like I said, it's just a totally different environment, and one which I really enjoyed, and I think that could be viable again in indoor football with the AFL again in this city.
Definitely. So kind of touch on, because you've coached in a couple different places that, environments that could be different, from Atlantic City to Tampa to, of course, Utah, Pittsburgh. So I guess kind of touch on those different environments, those different teams, as far as an AFL environment would be.
Well, every city's unique. You know that. It's kind of like you just have to find the pulse or the heartbeat of the community. And, that was a little bit easier for us here in Salt Lake City because I was here full time. But then when I went out to the Pittsburgh team, they were 4-14 the year before I got out there. And we wind up being 15-3. So you change the environment, change the culture, and of course wins help. But then the fans are behind you because it's a huge football town. And Lynn Swan was one of the owners, and so you get a guy like Swanee in the locker room trying to pick your brain on what's going on. And of course, you're going to listen to somebody like him. And then going down to Tampa, I had Derek Brooks was a team president. So you're working with another Hall of Famer, and you're just gleaning information from everybody. And that was another situation where turnarounds are easier when you're like they were 2-16 the year before I got to Tampa, and then we win 11 games and go to the championship game, go to the Arena Bowl to play the Philadelphia Soul in Philly. And so the difference in those two seasons isn't so much the ownership and the leadership, it's the way everybody gels together. So what I've found is like every one of these environments that loves arena football, of course they love a winner, but they also love to be in the know. I mean, they want to go and know the players. They want to go there and know the coaches. They want to know that you're part of the community. And when they have all that knowledge, there are rabid fan bases. And we've run into that in several stops. In Orlando, that as well, right? So it's just, these fans, they want to support the team, but knowing the team supports them as well.
Definitely. So thinking through your years and some of the best years you coached, right? So what are some characteristics of a good team, a good environment that you strive for with each of your teams?
Well, number one's cohesiveness, right? Because you could have the most talented team, and we used to always say if you go on a road trip and you got 20 guys and 20 cabs, you're in a bad situation. They're all going out to dinner by themselves. But when guys are hanging out together and they're cohesive and they've got a common bond, what I've tried to do in the most successful situations is find that synergy. Find those players that are interconnected. Either they've played together before, or they got some common friends, or both, and they've got that kind of we're going to play for each other mentality. And you can overcome some weaknesses in a lineup just by having that cohesion. And so that's number one for me is making sure we got good people, they're interconnected, and they're willing to have that, what I call the good struggle. I mean, it's going to be tough. Football's hard. It's a grind on the professional level. You're going to go through your ups and downs physically, mentally, emotionally, everything. You're away from home. You're a young man, got a lot of push-pull socially, especially now, right? It was different about 10, 12 years ago. When you were playing, there was less social media presence. There wasn't all this, everything's instant gratification the way it is now with players. So you've got to appeal to them as far as what you can do for them at the next level and how we want to proceed as a group. And so, cohesion is probably the number one thing.
Good. So let's I always try to provide a different angle for everybody I talk to, right? So for you, I would love to hear a profile of a player that you look for. When you're looking at a roster, you're looking at college teams or whatever players, what is something that, like, okay, these are things that I would love to have for my players?
It's funny that you say that, because like I used to do that without knowing I was doing it. And the person that brought me to the forefront of how we think about how we put our roster together and what type of player we're looking for was actually Derek Brooks. When I went down there, I really didn't know him very well. He became a good friend, and I still talk to him till today. And one of the things that he said to me was, let's sit down. And we sat down a whole afternoon. He said, define what's a Storm player. What are you looking for? What if you got the perfect mold, what is it? And we started checking all the boxes. Of course, you're going to look for a great athlete because they're professionals. They have to be good football players. So that box is self-explanatory. It's automatically checked. But the first thing that I look for is character. Is this somebody I can trust? Is football important to them? Are they going to be a good teammate? Have they been a good leader? Okay. And then we look at everything else, because, if a guy's been a team captain, let's say in his college or even at his high school, somebody's thought something enough of him to put him in a leadership position. Okay. So that's a great thing for me to know right off the bat. And you have conversations more than just like, hey, what number do you want to wear? Or, what position you think you're best at? I want to know, like, hey, you got brothers and sisters. How's mom and dad? What do they do for a living? What do you see? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And, do you have any other teammates that are playing currently? How do you feel about this league? All the things that I want to know, that before they arrive, I don't want somebody that's going to show up and, just poison the well because they've given me all the answers I want to hear that are all surface. I want to know what makes that person tick, so that when things are tough, I've got a guy I can rely on, and somebody that's going to look at me and go, Coach, I got you. Because it's a two-way street, right? I've got to have support of the players, and they've got to have my support. So, and I always tell my players, first of all, when things go wrong, it's my fault. We lose a game, it's on me. We lost the game. When you win, it's players done a great job. I got to be willing to stand in the fire when things are tough and not just take all the praise when things go well. And so, and I say this all the time to my teams, and I believe this. There hasn't been a coach yet that's won a game. And I don't care, Bill Belichick, whoever. No, a coach has never won a game. It's the guys that play between those stripes. And so you better know what makes them tick, find out what their hot button is, and put them in the right position, because coaching is teaching, but it's also orchestrating. And so, those are the factors I look at before I even sign a player. We're doing it right now. I'm coaching in the IFL, and I sent out 10 contracts to the league today. We're fielding a brand new team just because the results weren't forthcoming, and it's going to be based on what I just told you.
All right. So mention some of the guys who had a unique quality, like a Cy Burley or some of the other guys that you coached through the years. Mention, I guess, speak to some of the characteristics that certain guys that stick out to you and what made them special. And I guess using that conversation as to saying, these are things that I would like to see in players.
Yeah, it's over so many years. There's so many players I could single out, but a few that really jump off the page to me. We had a quarterback when I was with the Gladiators in New Jersey. His name was Glenn Foley. And Glenn Foley played at Boston College, played with the Jets, and was part of the Jets team with Bill Parcells that made the playoff run to the championship game in the AFC. And I learned a lot about professionalism from Glenn. Glenn talked always about how meetings should be held and who's accountable and all those type of things. And as a coach in those days, in the late 90s, I kind of looked at Glenn and I went, what, this guy's done it. And so I've got to have a small enough ego to walk through this door and say, what can I do better? How can we attack this thing a little bit? So Glenn was great at that. So I got it seems like a lot of quarterbacks have that kind of internal mechanism that they kind of see the game differently, right? Because they've always been in the big meeting rooms and all that stuff. And then I just fast forward to when the team moved to Las Vegas. I've never been around a player like Clint Dolezel. I mean, Clint, not only because he was one of the greatest arena football players that's ever played, but Clint had a way of when there was a switch that he pushed. And when it was game time, you would never find a tougher guy. I mean, the first time I saw him on the field, I'm looking at him going, he's 6'5", he's thin as a pole. I'm looking at this guy, he's going to take a few hits and he's not going to be long for this game. But he was tough as nails. You couldn't knock him down. And if you got to him, he got rid of the ball so darn fast. And what I learned from Clint was, be prepared, have fun being prepared, but also make sure that you protect your offensive line. He was great at getting the ball out so fast that it wouldn't matter what line group I put in front of him. And I coached the offensive line when Clint was my quarterback. And he would always just say, look, hey, give me 3 seconds. If you give me 3 seconds, we're going to score touchdowns. You give me less than 3 seconds, well, I'll get the ball out. We don't know what's going to happen all the time, but we'll do that. And then he also introduced me to the fact that, we brought in Lucas Yarnell, who'd played with him before, and some of these other guys, Brian Shaw, and all these guys that he had played with before. And then we brought in a guy named Marcus Nash, and Marcus was one of the greater OCs that we've ever had. And, he and Clint, instant chemistry. So that taught me the value of chemistry on the field. Those guys they go out and they play golf together. They play, video games together. Whatever they did, though, they would compete. Those two guys, screaming at each other over video games or mocking each other on the golf course. It would just, Clint taught me a lot about, hey, if you're going to compete all the way through. Don't put anything out there that you're going to be ashamed of. And it was just so great to have a guy like that playing for me. And then again, coaching against him, I saw exactly why he was successful, and he's still a successful coach, because he knows how to compete and he knows how to get the most out of those people around him. There were so many other players that I could point out over the years. Yourself and Dwayne Missouri, I learned a lot about, the hard off the edge, guys that just were willing to grind it out and get to the quarterback however they could do it. A guy like Devin Wyman that just taught me, you can't teach size, 6'8", 350 on a power team, and he could just push the middle of the pocket like nobody's business. A guy like Frank Carter, who played, fullback and linebacker. Yeah. And, you got a guy like Nitty G, you just give him the ball and he would run somebody over. It's like a bowling ball. And so you have these characteristics that you look at and go, now I've got a template for how I want to put a team together and how I want to win. And we used to always say, you win up the middle. So you had to have a good middle safety. You got to have a good OS. You had to have a good nose guard, center, quarterback, right? And a kicker that could kick onside kicks, like when we had Steve Viditek and and Mark Lewis, who's probably the best I've ever seen, being able to put the ball wherever he wanted to. All these pieces that you look at over the years and you say, that's what I want. These are the people I want to emulate in my production of player personnel. And it hasn't changed, really. In the league that I'm in right now, I see the same characteristics, but I go back, and I hate to say it, I hope Clint watches it because, he's one of my favorite people. But I would tell you, I want a Dolezel attitude. I want somebody that's a pissant, and I mean that in a good way, somebody that's going to fight every down, and somebody that's not going to accept bullshit from the people that he's around. And so if I can find a guy like that, I don't care what position he plays, this guy I want.
Definitely. I definitely always wanted to, I like to hear, with the show, it's all about kind of uplifting the guys who help put this game together. And there's so many stories out there of guys who not everybody knows about, through the years. They may have heard, certain teams were great teams, but they don't know about the pieces of those teams. There's so many great players out there. I always love to hear a name like Frank Carter that you mentioned. I remember when he was in his prime, just to hear the stories about guys like that, us as players or even, coaches, like, oh man, I remember that guy. He was a baller. You know what I mean? I like to hear them stories.
There are special guys like Damon Mason was one of my favorite players that I had him in Las Vegas, had him up here in Utah. He was tough as nails. I mean, you look at a guy like that. I mean, he would just knock the dog out of you every play and keep coming back for more. I don't know how many times he played through concussions and injuries and different things where he didn't care. He didn't care who you were. He was just going to knock you down and just keep going. And then, I got to meet a lot of legends in the game too. Guys that I didn't get to coach, but I loved still to this day. George LaFrance came to one of my games this year. He lives down in Arizona. One of my favorite people. I mean, humble as the day is long, probably one of the best guys off the net. I coached a guy named Cedric Robinson, who's got all the kickoff return touchdown records for the AFL. I coached him in college at Kentucky Wesleyan and brought him into the AFL. So you got stories like that, guys like that. And then a guy like Gary Compton that I hated competing against. He was going to hit you in the defensive side. He was going to make a clutch catch. He was going to be all over the darn field, and you had to have a plan for him. Barry Wagner, same thing. We had game plans just for Barry Wagner himself, trying to knock him out on kickoff return, and you couldn't take him off the field. So it's guys like that I look at the beginning of the league and the type of individuals that we were playing with and against, and it just humbles me because not that we don't see those type of players anymore in the indoor game, but it's just different, right? We're not getting a lot of the guys that have been camp cuts and guys that could play in the NFL next week. Rasheed Davis winds up doing that from the San Jose SaberCats, and some, obviously Kurt Warner's the poster boy for all that. But there's so many of these great players that get their opportunities. I mean, Fury, from the Dragons, and some of these other guys that wind up just jumping into the NFL because they've done so well in the AFL. There's not as much of that today. There's more into the CFL, but it's not as much into the NFL because we're not getting the trickle down and then the bounce back, right? We're getting the guys that are trying to fight their way through it. And that 53-man roster, as you know, is no joke to be able to get even on the practice squad these days. I think the last guy that I had that did that was Caesar Rayford, defensive end that I had with the Blaze, 6'7" kid that was a defensive end out of Washington. And here's a funny story about that. I'm just going to give you a quick one on Caesar Rayford. He's the NFLPA chapter president here in Salt Lake City. Okay. And I've coached with him before too. But Rayford gets signed by the Colts, has the most sacks in the preseason of any defensive lineman. And Will McClay calls me up. He's down with the Cowboys. And, Will from the AFL days and the Desperados and all that stuff. Will calls me up. He said, we're going to make a trade. And this gets back to the character thing we talked about. He said, we're going to make a trade. I want to trade a second-round draft pick to take Rayford off of the Colts roster. He made the 53-man, but we want to trade for him because we need a defensive end. He goes, Ron, we've been friends for a long time. Just tell me about him. Is he a pro? Is he going to show up and work hard? Is he a guy that we can count on? He didn't ask anything about his ability. They know it. But what they want to know is he somebody we can trust and somebody we can rely on and we can invest in? And that has not changed, and I'll continue to fight for my players to get those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I remember Caesar. He was like huge. I mean, he wasn't wide, but he was just like long as hell.
No, he looks like a basketball player, and he still does to this day. I mean, but he's one of those people that he sat down in my office after one off season with the Blaze. He had a notebook in his hand. He said, "Coach, what do I got to do to make the next level?" And I told him some footwork drills and things he wanted to do and all that stuff, and his professionalism and habits and everything. He filled up the notebook with notes within the hour that we sat down and talked, and did everything I asked him to do the next offseason, and then wound up getting his NFL shot. Played for the Cowboys for a couple of years, and then I wound up getting him back with the Tampa Bay Storm in 2017, of all things.
Mm-hmm. Good. So, not many people have this experience or this point of view. Kind of speak to what goes through your head when you win Coach of the Year. Is that you're not the braggadocious kind of person, but again, not many people have that experience or even whatever. Like, I'd love to hear in your mind the thoughts that go through your head when they announce you as Coach of the Year.
Well, the first time that I won it, we lost in a semifinal game to the Arizona Rattlers in Arizona. We were the 4 seed and they were the 2, and we knocked off San Antonio in the first round, and we felt pretty good about making the Arena Bowl. We thought we had a really good team. We did, and a really tight group. And when I won it, I was like, man, I just wish my team was with me. That's all I kept thinking about. I had the owner, Kristen Murdoch, was with me, and she presented the trophy to me and all that kind of stuff. And we had a good weekend, me and my wife, down in New Orleans and seeing all those guys. But you always want to hoist the trophy, and that was the big thing. And it was bittersweet, very humbling to know that my peers had voted me, because that's what happens. Your peers vote you in the Coach of the Year thing. It's not media driven and it's not player driven. It's other coaches. And when that happened, I said, you know what? And I've had a long career and still going on, obviously. But I said to myself, wow, it's a crazy thought. Mm-hmm. And the second time it happened with the Storm, I just said, you know what? And I went to Derek Brooks's office. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I said, regardless if I get it or not, because we were on our way up to Philadelphia, I said, he said, you know, you're up for it. And I said, you know, that's probably natural. I've been around for a little while. I said, but regardless of whether I get it or not, I don't want to make a big deal of it. I just want to make sure that the players are well taken care of on this trip. And that when it comes to time for all the pregame hoopla and all that stuff, we can talk about our team and not focus on any coach or any superstar that might be playing. Just focus on the team. And so I told my players, and you know, Clint doesn't even know this because he was a Philadelphia coach. I told my players that every time I say in the press conference what a great team Philadelphia has, that's code for we're going to kick their ass. So I said probably 3 or 4 times what a great team Philadelphia was. They'd beaten us twice during the season. They were the number 1 team and playing at home and all that stuff. And they beat us 44-40 in the Arena Bowl. It was a great game. But you know, it's humbling when you get voted by your peers, and to win it twice, I think just, again, it's a testament of longevity, but it's also a testament, I think, to the type of players you have. I mean, and the way that those guys go to the wall for you and make sure that, you know, they're representing the team right, the league right, and making sure that when we're in those big games, they're going to give you everything they've got and a little bit more. And so I've always had those type of teams, win or lose. But in those instances where I was able to be Coach of the Year, I just found it extremely humbling. You know, I'm not one of those people that likes to talk about what I've done and what I'm going to do. It's always what's next. That's kind of my mentality.
Mm-hmm. All right. Fast forward to, you know, most recently as last year when, you know, you made your move to the IFL. I guess kind of speak to differences in the game. You know, we're all in the same field and everything, but there are differences. I guess maybe touch on things that you've seen or you know, during your journey into the IFL. I guess kind of speak to that.
Well, first of all, I didn't anticipate coaching the IFL. It wasn't something that I really was going gung-ho for. I mean, and like I was coaching at a local high school and teaching there, and it was good to be able to sleep in my own bed for a few years. Because prior to that, I'd been in Atlantic City and then in the CFL. And, you know, so now I get a chance to go back to professional football, but there's no team here. So now I got to go away again, right? But I went down to Vegas for the championship game. And really what it was is just I wanted to watch a good game. I had, you know, it's only a few hours drive from here. And, you know, Kevin Guy was one of the coaches in the game. Rob Keefe, Les Moss, and all these coaches, Mike Davis with the Vegas team that I coached with in Canada, all these people that were friends. So I just went to hang out and watch the game, and didn't anticipate, you know, working in the league. And then 2 weeks later, the Northern Arizona owner calls me up and said, Coach Moss left to go up to the Bay Area Panthers, and would you be interested in interviewing for the job? So I said, you know, I'm one of those people, I never say never. So I got on the phone with him and said, okay, let's do that. And then I was able to hire some really good coaches, and Cy Burley being one of those, and just kind of learn the game. I purposely hired 2 coordinators, 1 OC, 1 DC, instead of taking a coordinator job myself so I could learn. Again, it's humbling. being 30-something years as a coach, you're thinking, well, I got this stuff down. I know pretty much what's going to happen. But it's a different game. And so you got to put yourself back on the learning curve, back in a different football world as far as what I'm going to do and how I'm going to learn it. And you got to learn it all over again. And so that's been invigorating. We had a rough season, but we're rebuilding really strong. So the guys that we bringing back and the template we talked about for the type of player we're looking for and the contracts we have out, I think we're going to be a markedly better team next year, and I'm really excited about it.
Good. Yeah, I know it's definitely two different types of games, and I always like to hear from the coaches, like Coach O'Neill, Ron O'Neill, who's coached both. I like to hear guys speak to that because, again, you guys have firsthand experience of, a recruiting profile of players who've, from both leagues to the experience. I guess kind of touch base on the IFL experience.
Well, there's a few things. So the first thing that jumps off the page to me is that the run game is valuable. Not like in the AFL game where you've got a glorified guard that's back there and it's all pass pro. You've got an actual running back that's going to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's going to run the football. You're going to try to get more of those road graders up front that can get off the ball and run block. The quarterbacks are most of the time, out of shotgun, 2 men in motion instead of one. So it's more like Canada in that way. So it's kind of a marriage between Canadian football rules and the AFL game. I mean, it's kind of that kind of hybrid. And then on the defensive side, you have very few illegal defenses because you got line twists and stunts, and you can do all these different things, and you can play zone coverage. You can drop linemen into coverage. It's a defensive coach's wonderland, really, because you can do so many things where in the AFL game, you're kind of handcuffed. I mean, you better find really good cover guys and have played a way to play man-to-man all over the darn field. And then you got offensive coordinators that are looking at that and saying, well, we can sucker you into some deep throws and all that kind of stuff. So it changes the way you coach. And then in a kicking game, it's different too, because you've got the ability to kick the ball for a deuce, a 2-point kick off the kickoffs. You got the non-returnables in the end zone that are good for a point if you can make a tackle in the end zone. So a kicking game could be worth 10 points in a possession if you do it right, and if you've got a great kicker, or it could be as little as 6 if you're missing extra points. So there's just such a variance in how you've got to coach the game. It makes you a lot more particular on technique with the offensive side because of the run game. And then on the defensive side, it juices up a lot of defensive coordinators now. They could find some exotic things to do and some ways to kind of reteach the indoor game. So I think it's a lot of fun that way, and it's very challenging. Both leagues are exceptional. When you look at the AFL, I loved coaching the offense in the AFL because it was like dial it up and throw the ball deep. And every quarterback that I had would, full strike no matter on the field. Where if I had a Randy Hippert, a guy that could just pick people apart and throw the ball deep, at Joe Germain and Clint Ozell, and the list goes on and on. Tommy Grady, oh my goodness, he threw for 120-something touchdowns one year when we had him with the Blaze. So, you've got that, and now you've got a guy that can be a little bit more of a hybrid. We got a guy named Ramon Atkins, and he's 6'3", 230. He'll run over a defensive back. He's not a shy guy. Yes, he can still deliver the ball downfield, but you can run the ball with him, not just on the goal line. And you can run RPOs, and you can do different things on the offensive side. So there's a lot more to it. But at the same time, coaching is coaching. And there are so many great coaches in the AF1 and in the IFL that they just find a way to win because they study it, they make it their own, and they get the right players that fit their model.
All right. Yeah, definitely. So I don't want to hold you up too much, but I definitely appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and giving the insight that you bring to the game. In closing, I would love for you to give any advice to any players that are out there that they're at a crossroads and they're thinking about what to do career-wise, and they just need a little advice on the indoor game and advice on, progressing in your professional football career.
Well, I mean, to me, it's pretty simple. And I've said this for years. If they're paying, keep playing. You've got the opportunity, and this as a player. I mean, if somebody still wants you and wants to sign a contract, keep playing. Keep it on film, get something out there, but be positive about what you're doing. And in this regard, it doesn't matter what the salary is attached to what you're doing. If you've got a great plan and you want to put awesome things on film that people are going to look at and pay you more, well, you got to earn that. You can't just expect to show up and just say, because I want this, I deserve it. No, you got to earn it. And football's always been that way. You have to earn what you're going to get. And I think that right now we've got a lot of good young players that are sitting back saying, well, why should I bother with that? Well, if football isn't that important to you, don't bother with it. But if football is hugely important to you, you will find a way. So don't let any coach, player personnel guy, or whatever tell you can't do something. Take it as a chip on your shoulder where I got to show up. I got to outwork everybody else. I've got to be the guy that's the positive influence on the team that people are going to want to have on their roster. You can listen to guys from Nick Saban to Bill Belichick to whatever. What's the first thing that a scout asks? The same thing I told you when we talked about Caesar Rayford. They want to know about the person. Mm-hmm. They can see what the talent is. They can know how it might fit them. But if you're not a good person, and if you're not a good teammate, and if you don't follow the rules of what you're supposed to do, and you want to jump ahead of everybody or shortcut the system, you're never going to make it. So have your plan, work it, and just understand that it's going to take being special to achieve your goals. Pretty simple.
Sounds good. Appreciate you, Coach. And like I said, I appreciate the story and your perspective on the game. Like I said, it's very valuable to me just to hear your opinion on certain things. But again, appreciate you coming on and taking your time out. And good luck, going into this upcoming season and recruiting and all that stuff. If I can help, you let me know.
Well, I certainly will. And EJ, just thank you so much for having this conversation with me because, to me, you're not, aside from being one of my favorite players, as a coach, you've always done right by your teams. You've always been that guy that's been thoughtful and methodical about your work. And I really respect you for that. And so I'll keep watching your podcasts here because you've had some, enormous legends on this thing. And I'm just kind of humbled to be thrown in the mix. So thank you very much.
No problem. Again, appreciate you. And again, I look up to you. And, I'm sitting back watching your story, looking to continue to keep being inspired by the things that you do.
Appreciate that, EJ.
All right. Well, have a good night and appreciate you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.